The NFL draft is over, and that means it's time for fantasy football. Today, we're talking rookie quarterbacks. We'll be discussing their landing spots, our expectations, and where you should draft them in Dynasty. Plus, I'll be releasing my updated Dynasty rookie rankings, all on the Fantasy First Down. Welcome back to the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley. Today we're talking quarterbacks. If you haven't already and you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and like this video. If you're on Instagram, make sure you like and follow, and make sure you also follow us on Twitter. On Twitter, we're at the Fantasy First Down, no O. On Instagram, we're at the Fantasy First Down. Today we're talking about quarterbacks, and we're going to be talking about landing spots. We're going to talk about the implication for fantasy, and as you can see, I've got my Dynasty ranks up there, though I have listed them in the order that they were taken in the draft. Now, Caleb Williams is obviously the biggest winner. We knew he was going to be a winner by going to the Bears. He was going to be going first pick. That's been coming for a long time. But the biggest win here is who they've drafted around him. They've given him Rome Odunze, and that gives him some fantastic pass catchers. He already had DJ Moore. He already had Keenan Allen, and now he gets a real stud who can win with contested catches. He's also got Cole Kmet there, plus DeAndre Swift is a great pass-catching running back. That makes him a fantastic fantasy asset. He could be good in his first year, although players generally do struggle in the first year in the NFL, but the Bears have done everything they can to set up around him. Where he's really going to win, though, is in Dynasty, and for me, he's one of my top Dynasty players. Even in one quarterback leagues, I'm still taking him fourth off the board after the top three wide receivers. In Superflex, you can take him a little bit earlier as well. It really depends on your need. But for me, he's a guy who's going to be fantastic for fantasy and then in the NFL for years to come. He can run enough. He's accurate enough, but he's also capable of being aggressive and scoring a lot of points. He's got all those pieces that we really want for fantasy. He's someone that you really should be taking or even trading up to get in your Dynasty drafts. This is a really good quarterback draft for Dynasty, and the same thing for wide receivers. So those top few picks are going to be really valuable. If you can maybe trade one of your running backs to someone who's really needy, you can go up and get a player that's going to be fantastic for years to come, knowing that running backs are going to come and go, and you can get one in the future years. Now, behind Caleb Williams is Jaden Daniels, and he's pretty close for me. The benefit of Jaden Daniels is that his legs are fantastic. He's Lamar Jackson-like, but more accurate and more better decision maker. He's not quite as good with his legs, but he's definitely good enough. The concerns are he's a little bit skinny, and that could lead to some injuries in the NFL. He's also going to a weaker team and a weaker setup than the Bears. He's going to the Commanders, and they don't really have the greatest pass catchers at the moment. They've got Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson struggling a little bit. And after that, it's rookies and players that we're not really trusting to really get the job done. So Daniels is iffy for that reason, but with his legs, that's still going to make him really reliable, even from day one. So in fantasy, he's probably even a better option in the first year. We know that first-year quarterbacks will run a lot, because they are not comfortable throwing yet. So I would expect that we see a lot of running from Jaden Daniels in his first year in the NFL. Now, that will calm down a little bit, and we'll have to wait and see how he goes long-term. He's not quite at Caleb Williams' standards of safeness, but I do really like him, and I take him above all of the running backs in that region of Brock Bowers and the fourth and fifth wide receivers as well. It really depends on your exact needs. In Superflex, he goes even higher. In Superflex, I'd be considering in taking him in front of everyone, but maybe Harrison, maybe Neighbors. But even then, there is an argument that you probably could take him second off the board after Caleb Williams. Where it gets a little bit iffy is Drake May. Now, Drake May is a good quarterback, but he's going to need a lot of time to develop. He does have Josh Allen style upside, perhaps not quite with the level of running ability that Josh Allen has, but he's got that big size. He's got a big arm. He's got the talent. It's just whether he can put it all together. He's going to New England, and that's not the greatest landing spot. The upside is they're not ready to win now, so they're not going to force him out there and make him play. They can let him develop behind Jacoby Brissett, who we know is trustworthy enough to run the offense for a while. Once they're out of playoff contention, I'd expect that he starts playing. For that reason, you don't really want him in fantasy unless we start to hear that he's going to be playing from day one. Having said that, in Dynasty, he's going to be a really strong asset. The upside is higher than the other guys because we know how talented he can be, but he's a long way behind Williams and Daniels for me. I'd be taking him well behind most of the top wide receivers. Probably end of the first round, early second round is when I'd start thinking about him, depending on my needs. In Superflex, probably taking him about 6th or 7th off the board. It really depends on how much you need a quarterback. Where things get really iffy for the quarterbacks is after that. And the biggest mistake on day one, as we talked about earlier in my previous video, Michael Penix. I have no idea what the Falcons are doing. Totally wacky move. This is not how you win Super Bowls. This is how you make sure that you're mediocre for an extended period of time. They needed to put weapons in place to support Kirk Cousins because they've essentially started their Super Bowl window by giving a lot of money to a veteran quarterback. Now they've drafted a quarterback who's going to sit in behind him. They can't use that pick on weapons now, and they can't use a lot of the money they're spending on Kirk Cousins on supporting Michael Penix. So they're hurting both players. They needed to pick one lane or the other, and they haven't done either, and that's a real problem. Now, when Penix comes in, well, we don't know. I mean, Cousins is presumably going to get the first go. They're paying a lot of money in his first year, and let's face it, Penix really isn't ready, even though he's a 6-year quarterback. He's also very injury prone, and that makes this a risky pick in the first place. I truly don't understand. I know they rated him as their second quarterback off the board, but given their situation, this doesn't make any sense. The good thing for Penix is that he will have time to sit and develop, and he's going to have the experience of playing at some point in time because Cousins isn't going to be around forever. They are going to move on. They do believe in Penix. He's just got to hope that the same coaching staff's there, that the coaching staff that drafted him, because they clearly trust in him. They put some weapons in place. They've got Bijan, who's not going to help him too much, but he is a good pass catcher out of the backfield. They've got Kyle Pitts, who he's going to be able to use. He'll be around for a couple of years, so hopefully he's still around when Penix is actually starting. Plus, he's got Drake London. Plus, they've brought in some other wide receivers. So you can trust that he's going to be okay, but the problem is you're probably going to have to wait at least a year, maybe even 2, before he starts starting, unless Cousins gets injured. And one thing we know about Kirk Cousins is he'll play through nearly everything. So I don't really like this pick. I don't like this idea. I'm taking Penix behind all the other day one guys simply because there's a real risk that he just never plays at all. It's entirely possible he sits behind and then he can never prove that he's better than the starter, and they're never willing to give him that chance. We've seen that happen with quarterbacks picked in the first round before. That could happen here, especially if a new coaching staff gets put in place in a couple of years if things aren't working out. Now, JJ McCarthy is also a big risk, but that's because he's not the most talented player. He's been a system quarterback at Michigan, a very good system quarterback, and he performed when required, but we don't know how he's going to stand up in the NFL. He's a lot younger. He's only 21, and that means there's a lot more upside, but he is going to need to develop, and they are going to have to start him relatively soon. I don't think Sam Darnold's going to be able to work this offense in a way that means they're going to keep him in that job for the long term. I would expect we see JJ McCarthy pretty soon, probably mid this coming season. He's got a lot of weapons around him. He's got Justin Jefferson. He's got Jordan Addison, and that's really good for fantasy. He's an okay rusher, though that's not really his thing. So I wouldn't be expecting a lot of points there, but I really don't think this is going to be a good thing for Justin Jefferson, and that's the real concern here. If I'm a Jefferson owner, I'm probably trying to trade him away for a Harrison or Neighbors if I can tempt someone with the big name. The reality is you're getting a lot more years out of those guys, and you're probably going to get more upside. It's hard to see Jefferson performing when he's got either Darnold or McCarthy throwing him the ball. Neither of them are going to be aggressive enough to really make it work for him. Plus, he's still got presumably TJ Hawkinson coming back from injury. There's going to be targets to work around, but I don't know that enough are going to go to Jefferson. As for McCarthy, he's my 4th favorite dynasty option because I feel like they're going to give him a proper go and because he at least have weapons to throw the ball to, but I am a little bit nervous about how they're going to use him in that system. I hope that they don't use him the same way Michigan did as a game manager. I hope they're actually going to give him an opportunity to cook. Now, Bo Nix would have been the worst pick on day one if it hadn't been for Michael Penix. The Broncos should be very thankful that the Falcons messed up ahead of them so that they didn't cop the brunt of the media, because this is a bad pick. It didn't make sense in this range. They could have traded down to the end of the first round and still gotten that 5-year contract, or they could have gone into the second round. I don't think anyone else is taking this guy anytime soon. Maybe the Giants think about it in the second round, but I'm really not sure they do for Nix. He's just not that good. We've seen what he can do. He's been in college for a long time. We've kind of seen his upside. He can manage the game. He's a Sean Payton style guy. People compare him to Drew Brees, but he's not as good as Drew Brees. He's just a similar style of player. that's not a good reason to draft a player. So I'm nervous about what Bo Nix can do, but the difference is we know that he's at least going to play in the near future. Zach Wilson and Jarrett Stidham are very meh, and the Broncos kind of suck. So they're going to lose games early on, and I expect we'll see Bo Nix well before we see Michael Penix, and maybe even before we see JJ McCarthy or Drake May. He's someone that's at least going to get on the field, and that gives him a lot more dynasty value than it does someone like Michael Penix, where you could potentially be waiting for several years. Now, after the day one quarterbacks, we had a big break. In fact, the longest break ever between quarterbacks, and then we got a flourish on day three, and there's quite a few guys here. Now, the biggest name to think about is Spencer Rattler, and I'm a little bit surprised he fell this far. I know there were concerns about him. There were a lot of reports that came out that teams weren't really happy about things they saw on a Netflix show from when he was 18. That seems a little bit strange to me. Netflix, as we know, will not always give the exact story of somebody. They're looking for interesting stories, not accurate stories. So I don't know that I would have read into something that happened 3 or 4 years ago on a show that's heavily edited and designed to make someone look a certain way. Having said that, the Saints were smart and they took him and they got fantastic value. The 5th round is amazing value for a guy that a lot of people thought would go on day 2. Now, Rattler's very raw. We've seen him lose his starting job multiple times, but he's a guy that's got a lot of upside. He can sit behind Derek Carr. He can develop. He's probably better than Jake Haener for me, even though Haener was drafted earlier. So I do like the idea of the Saints taking Rattler. It's a very smart pick. They needed someone to develop, and I feel like he's the right guy to develop. Will he be a starter in the future? Well, he's got more chance than anybody else does on the third day, but I wouldn't be reaching for him. He's really a deep league guy if you're playing in those big 14, 16 team leagues, or alternatively, you're playing in a super flex league where you've got relatively deep benches and you just need to take a couple of shots on quarterbacks. Spencer Rattler is the guy I'd take a shot on, but you are not going to see much out of him in the next year or two unless Derek Carr gets injured or just really stinks up the place and they're willing to try Rattler just to see what happens. Jordan Travis falls in a similar area, but he's not as good as Rattler. Plus, he's coming off a very serious injury, and we don't know how he's going to be when he gets back, and we don't know when he's going to be back. So there is a lot of risk with Travis, but there's a significant amount of upside. He definitely would have gone earlier than this if it wasn't for the injury. The injury's really killed his draft stock, and that's a big win for the Jets. It makes sense for the Jets to pick someone up. They waited until the 5th round, which is smart drafting. They've got Rodgers for the near future, but we know that injuries are always possible. Likewise, they've got Tyrod Taylor, who can back him up. Taylor is not someone that they're going to be really investing in. He's just there as a backup if they're in that win now window. But that win now window is only going to last a year or two, and that's when Travis can step in. So he's more of an investment in fantasy football and dynasty. I definitely wouldn't be drafting him this year for any reason. He's someone who will probably sit on the practice squad or as their third quarterback through most of the next year and maybe even 2. Hopefully he's a backup by next year at least. But he's not a guy that I'd be relying on in the near future. He's just a good stash. Now, the Patriots went double QB and they picked up Joe Milton. I don't really understand what they're doing here. I know they're not winning anytime soon, but Milton's a high upside guy, but it's very unlikely he hits. And he's going to need excellent quarterback coaching to make it work. He's got a massive arm, but he's extremely inaccurate. He makes bad decisions. I really don't see this working. I don't understand what they're trying to do here. They're not known for being able to develop quarterbacks. They've tried to develop multiple quarterbacks a number of times, and they've shown that's just not their strength. So I don't understand why they're getting in a guy who needs a lot of development and a lot of coaching when they need to be focusing on Drake May already. They've already got a rookie to be developing. Why are you bringing in another guy? Why are you wasting a draft pick when you could have used that on someone else? Now, I do understand that the late draft picks in this year's draft weren't worth as much because so many people have stayed in college because of the NIL system. Plus, there's a lot of guys who have extra years of eligibility because of COVID and other issues as well. So there is a reason they can afford to use this pick more than other years, but I still don't love the pick. I don't understand what they're doing, and I'm not interested in at all in Dynasty. There's so many players they prefer to use in front of him. It would surprise me if he even made the roster, if I'm completely honest. Now, speaking of weird mistakes, I don't understand why the Ravens are taking Devon Ly. We're talking about a guy who wasn't even the best available player on the board. I didn't even think he was going to get drafted. I was a little bit surprised that anybody drafted him. The only reason I like this more than Joe Milton is at least there is a path to being a backup. If he really impresses, he could potentially be the backup and then eventually get to start. There's no situation where Joe Milton's even going to be the second quarterback on that team because Brissett is always going to be there with May. He needs to be there for that veteran presence. At least with the Ravens, you can see a situation where they think that Leary might be up to back up Jackson. I think he's more likely to be dropped, honestly. They've already got Johnson. They like to use Cunningham in a whole heap of different ways. Every team seems to do that, and then they let him go. So it is possible Leary gets that third QB job. I can't imagine he's ever going to get a snap in the NFL. I just don't think he's good enough. But, I mean, in a really super deep 32-team league, which I'm in a couple of, I mean, he's a guy you can take a shot on, but he's not a guy I'm interested in. On the other hand, I'm a little bit interested in Michael Pratt. I feel like this is more competition for Sean Clifford, who didn't really impress last year, but is still their backup. They need to push him a little bit. Jordan Love is clearly the starter there. And while I don't agree with how they went through that whole process, I think they killed Aaron Rodgers' Super Bowl window by taking Love when they did. But now he's that guy, and they need to bring in guys to back him up and to give him a little bit of competition. I don't know that Sean Clifford's that guy. I like that they brought in Pratt. Pratt's got a little bit of upside. It makes sense to have a go with him. So I do like that pick, especially given it was so late on day 3 that there's very minimal risk. But because you've drafted him instead of making him an undrafted free agent, there's a whole lot more upside there. I'll also be looking at the undrafted free agent guys in my next dynasty rankings as well. So make sure you look out for them. Now, I also wanted to mention the kickers here because there's not as many quarterbacks as there are for a lot of the other positions. Now, none of these kickers are amazing, but Will Reichard is clearly the main guy, and the Vikings have given him a chance to compete. They've only got John Parker-Romo in there. He's not really ever played much NFL football. He's been a backup guy and a practice squad guy the whole time. I think they're giving Reichard a real chance to be the starter here. I don't love drafting kickers, but if you're going to draft one, draft it very late in a draft where every player in that day 3 area is worth less than they usually would be. So it makes sense to draft a kicker here. It's certainly better than a 4th-round punter, even though I like to see an Aussie going in the draft. Will Reichard is a guy that I would not be taking in fantasy unless you're in a really deep dynasty league where everyone's fighting over kickers. In that case, he's the main rookie that I'd be taking, but I certainly wouldn't reach for him. There's far from a guarantee he gets the job. I know the depth chart looks really good right now, but it is not hard to go out and trial 5 different veteran kickers and pick one up. There's so many veteran kickers available. Teams find it very easy to go out and track one down. I still understand using a pick on one because round 6, round 7 guys are mostly going to not make the roster anyway. So why not give it a go on a guy that does at least have upside? I also don't mind Joshua Carty. He's fine for the Rams. The Rams have really had a lot of kicking issues. They needed to bring someone new in, and I feel like he's the favorite to get that job. I'm not sure that he's as good as Reichard. He doesn't have that same massive leg, but he's a guy that they could at least have a go with, and I'm fine with that as well. He's someone you can pick up in really deep dynasty leagues if all the kickers are snapped up because of this situation with your league format. Cam Little's not a guy I'm particularly interested in. They've already got Sly and Patterson in there. I personally like Patterson a lot, Riley Patterson. But Joey Sly is the favorite to get that job at the moment. I can't imagine Cam Little getting it. I didn't even expect he'd be drafted. I thought he wasn't even the 3rd best kicker available. So I'm a little bit surprised they went with that. He's not someone I want in Dynasty or in fantasy in general. And even if he gets the job, I'm not sure that I'd really be trusting him. He's the kind of guy who could have the job and then lose it by week 4. So I'm a little bit nervous about him. The upside's there, but it's so unattainable at this stage that I can't imagine a situation where you'd want him in fantasy. Now, I'll be back with more positions. I'll be talking about the running backs. I'll be talking about the wide receivers and the tight ends very soon. So make sure you like and subscribe on YouTube. Make sure you like and follow on Instagram at The Fantasy First Down. And make sure you follow us on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. This has been The Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley. Thanks for watching.